I've been known to make, on this channel, some videos that say a lot of bad things about ski resorts. So today I'm slowing down a little bit, and instead of a hater's guide, I'm just going to give you a neutral summary of each ski area in Colorado. We'll primarily talk about each major resort's highlights, challenges, who I think it's best for, and who I think should look elsewhere. Please keep in mind that this is all my opinion, but I'm hoping that this provides a helpful tool for deciding which ski resort to visit. So all that being said, let's jump right into Colorado ski resorts in a nutshell. We'll go in alphabetical order, so starting with Arapahoe Basin. Arapahoe Basin is one of the closest ski areas to Denver, but if you go on a peak day, you'll be battling I-70 traffic the entire way. Arapahoe Basin is called the Legend for a reason. Its big mountain steeps, chutes, cliffs, moguls, and trees are experiences you won't forget. In addition, the Legend offers some awesome ungroomed bowl terrain that is skiable by intermediate level skiers. The scenery of a basin is very different than that of most of the other Colorado ski resorts, as it has a lot more terrain that is above treeline. The basin offers a vast variety of different terrain, with its only true lacking being in groomers. As such, if you enjoy skiing groomers, I would look elsewhere. However, if you enjoy bowl skiing or extreme skiing, a basin is your place. A basin is very cheap relative to the surrounding mountains, although day ticket prices may go up due to its recent acquisition by industry giant Eldora. The vibes at a basin are absolutely immaculate, so if you're looking for a much more enjoyable atmosphere than the uptight, rushed, entitled attitudes at other larger resorts, head to the Legend. The Legend never has lift lines longer than 10 minutes because it is constrained by parking and pass sales are limited. There are 3 primary drawbacks to the basin. For one, it has no lodging at the base, meaning you'll have to drive to get to it. Secondly, its lift infrastructure is rather lacking, with a few key lifts still being very slow and requiring upwards of 10 minutes to ride. The final piece is that Arapahoe Basin is very small compared to the surrounding resorts. As a whole, if you love extreme terrain or just want to experience the vibe, head to the Legend. If you're a resort skier and require good accommodation, grooming, or lower level terrain, avoid it. Next is Aspen Highlands. Aspen Highlands is one of 4 resorts in and around the town of Aspen, which is a bit far away from Denver, so it requires a 3 to 4 hour drive with no traffic or a flight into town. Highlands is the most raw of the 4 Aspen resorts, as it offers the best extreme terrain of the 4 in the world famous Highland Bowl and surrounding areas. The lift infrastructure is pretty good, with mostly high-speed lifts and negligible lift lines. However, the 2 primary shortcomings are that there is no redundancy out at the base if the primary lift goes down, and the second is that the Highlands Bowl requires a long, strenuous hike, although that is more of a benefit than a drawback in the opinion of some. As previously touched on, the mountain is best for extreme skiers. I would recommend that everyone else stays away. We'll talk more about the background of the area and how to plan a trip in just a second. Next is Aspen Mountain. Aspen Mountain, also known as Ajax, is right next to Aspen Highlands, so you can use that for the travel aspect. As a whole, the entire Aspen area is extremely expensive, and it has a reputation of containing many, well, not so nice out-of-towners. However, the mountain aesthetic of Ajax is very nice, as the ski mountain originates from right in the town. Crowds aren't as big of an issue at Ajax as at other resorts in Colorado, and the resort features several good blue groomers and lots of good double black borderline extreme tree skiing. The lift infrastructure is relatively modern, although certain secondary lifts are still old and slow. As a whole, Aspen Mountain isn't nearly as big as some of the other resorts, and you're also just paying for the name, so just beware that it may not be all it's cut out to be. One of the only things Aspen Mountain has going for it on the financial side of things is that it is accessible on the full Icon and Icon Base Plus passes. I would recommend Aspen for anyone who wants a European-style, expensive flyaway ski vacation with lots of expensive shopping and dining options. The après scene is also pretty good, and if you're an expert skier who likes trees, Aspen may be your place. I would recommend that beginners and low intermediates stay away. For less expensive lodging, you can look to Glenwood Springs, which requires an hour drive to the resort each morning, but nonetheless, I would recommend that those on any semblance of a budget stay away as well. Next is Beaver Creek. Beaver Creek has a reputation somewhat similar to Aspen Mountain. The mountain has neighborhood upon neighborhood of multi-million-dollar ski-in, ski-out houses owned by the uber-rich. However, this stigma about the type of people who ski Beaver Creek leads to there being a much friendlier vibe. Chairlift conversations are a staple at Beaver Creek, much more so than any other resort on the I-70 corridor. Beaver Creek does most types of terrain well. It is one of the very best mountains for greens on the whole continent. It has a handful of really nice blue cruisers along with a couple of short, more challenging, ungroomed blues. It has plenty of mogul runs and some good trees if you know where to look. The only terrain Beaver Creek lacks is extreme terrain, as they only have one area that is relatively limited in features. Beaver Creek is quite a long way away from Denver, but lodging can be extremely expensive given Beaver Creek's reputation. It has one of the best mountain villages in the state, however. If you do decide to drive, it is certainly doable, and parking isn't nearly as much of a pain as at some other resorts. The lift infrastructure is top tier, with very minimal lift lines and high-speed lifts everywhere you turn. There are certain choke points where runs get very busy, but as a whole, Beaver Creek is good for all ability levels short of die-hard experts, and works for both day trippers and vacationers. Next up is Breckenridge. Breck is one of the most popular resorts in all of Colorado. As such, it gets extremely, suffocatingly busy on peak days. However, if you can survive that, you'll be rewarded with immaculate groomers, ample extreme terrain, plentiful on-mountain amenities, and a beautiful town and village. Breck is often marketed as a great learning resort, but its low quantity of greens leads to crowded runs and long lift lines in beginner areas. As such, I would recommend that beginners avoid Breck. Intermediates and expert skiers will find great terrain for their respective ability levels at Breck. However, Breck doesn't offer great in-between terrain. The typical desires of a single black skier, moguls, and trees are practically non-existent at Breck. As such, I would recommend that those skiers also avoid Breck. Breckenridge is very accessible from Denver by driving, but as is with the rest of the surrounding area, you'll be fighting I-70 traffic the whole way. The lifts are mostly high speed, but the lift lines are still everywhere on bad days. Parking can be a nightmare if you don't get there well before lifts open. If you want a relaxing ski day where you're not constantly worrying about trying to beat the crowds, I would avoid Breck. If you don't mind the crowds and just want an authentic Colorado ski vacation, then Breck is all yours. Next is Buttermilk. Buttermilk is like the neglected middle child of the 4 Aspen resorts. To be honest, it's not really all that good at any one thing specifically. It has great terrain parks, I suppose, because it hosts the X Games, so if you're a park skier, I guess that's an option. Aspen Skiing Company has tried to brand Buttermilk as a beginner mountain, but the problem with that is then that the entire beginner population who skis there all ends up on the same single green run on the front side, and it's just chaos. I really don't recommend Buttermilk for anyone other than park skiers. It's in the Aspen area, so just like Highlands and Ajax, it's more difficult to get to. The blacks aren't great, the blues are practically non-existent, and the greens are overcrowded to all heck, so my advice overall is to avoid it unless you just want to ski it for the novelty. Next up is Ski Cooper. Ski Cooper is a non-profit, so of course, I absolutely love them. It also has quite the interesting history, but that's for a different video, Skier72. Cooper has a policy with grooming where they rotate grooming instead of grooming trails every night, so that their snow stays relatively soft. And to be completely honest, in the course season, their strategy really does pay off. They just recently added a backside expansion that has some good trees. Given that Cooper is such a small hill, it doesn't have any great extremes or moguls, but the trees are sufficient for advanced skiers and there's a decent selection of blues and greens. The lifts are my biggest complaint, as the 2 chairlifts take over 10 minutes to ride. Cooper is very remote and difficult to access, so it's not a first choice for most Denverites because there's no base village lodging or anything. However, this remote location lends itself to a sheer lack of crowds, which is always awesome. And lift ticket prices aren't incredibly egregious either. I recommend Cooper for lower level skiers and anyone who wants to experience old school skiing. Next up is Copper. If you asked what resort in Colorado has the worst lift lines in the state, I'd say that over the past 2 seasons, it's definitely been Copper. I suppose that all of the negative press about Vail resorts has been pushing people away from Breck, Vail, and Keystone. A-Basin's reservation system limits their visits, and Loveland doesn't have a big pass affiliation, so more and more traffic has been diverted to Copper Mountain and Winter Park, which we'll discuss later. Copper has a decent selection of terrain for every level. They have strong lift infrastructure, but yet still see 30-minute plus lines at Flyer, Eagle, Super Bee, and Timberline on peak days. The backup lifts that aren't as busy are all long and excruciatingly slow. Copper seems to have a much higher proportion of icy runs than at other resorts, and I'm not sure if that's the slope aspect, the skier volume, the geographical location and microclimate, or an over-reliance on artificial snow. But I found that the snow quality at Copper tends not to be as good as at other nearby resorts, at least on the main runs. One of the only good things about Copper is that it has very good grooming coverage. So if you want to rip groomers on non-peak days, Copper's your go-to. For everyone else, I would say that there are many other nearby resorts that are better. Next is Crested Butte. Crested Butte has gone slowly downhill since Vail Resorts acquired it, but it's still a great mountain. The most striking feature of Crested Butte is its incredible selection of extreme terrain. If you love to ski the extremes, Crested Butte is an automatic addition to your list. It has a decent selection of blues and greens, although it is rather lacking in moguls. Crested Butte's terrain is very well rounded. However, the one major downside of Crested Butte is its remote location in the middle of the state. A 4 to 5 hour drive from Denver, it's certainly not practical for a day trip, so you're almost exclusively restricted to staying at the resort or in a nearby town, unlike the I-70 resorts which can be commuted to from Denver. Crested Butte's lift infrastructure is overall decently strong, although peak weekends can expose the need for upgrades on the Paradise and Red Lady Express lifts. As a whole, Crested Butte is perfect for a vacation for a family that is composed of several different skier levels. I know that sounds rather specific, but if that's you, where someone skis extremes and someone else is only on greens, Crested Butte is your mountain. Next is Echo. Echo is an interesting one, as it's both the closest resort to Denver, but it's also the smallest resort we'll talk about on this list. Echo is an okay mountain for learning, although it should be noted that since it is so close to Denver, it relies on artificial snow much more than all the other mountains on this list. Echo stays open until 9 p.m. Wednesday through Saturday, so it's also an after-work option for certain Denverites. Echo obviously isn't a destination resort, but it is a solid choice if you're looking for a cheap lap or two on a Midwest caliber mountain. Next is Eldora. This one is also a bit of an outlier, as rather than heading into the mountains on I-70 or one of its alternates, you go to Boulder and then head down a canyon for a while. Because of this, Eldora is much more accessible to front range skiers than many of the other resorts listed. This is critical because Eldora has extremely little in the way of accommodation near the resort. Eldora is rather small, but despite its accessibility, it doesn't typically get too terribly crowded. The terrain at Eldora is milder than at other Colorado resorts, and its lift infrastructure, aside from the ultra-modern Alpenglow lift, is rather lacking. For obvious reasons, it doesn't have as extreme of terrain or get as much snow as other Colorado resorts. This leads to much flatter and icier trails. Eldora also is notorious for having such high winds that the entire resort has to close. However, above all this, my biggest complaint is that a day ticket for Eldora is way more expensive than it should be for that size and quality. As such, unless you are in Denver for something else and decide to take an easy ski day, or unless you really just hate I-70 that much, I would recommend heading elsewhere. Next up, to round out our trio of small resorts, we have Granby Ranch. Granby Ranch is located just north of the much larger, more difficult, snowier, but also busier Winter Park. Granby Ranch is home to lots of very expensive properties, so despite its small stature, it, similarly to Eldora, way overcharges for a day of skiing. Granby is also the only place I've ever skied in the rain in Colorado. Granby does have one detachable, but its other main lift is old and slow. The snow quality, as just mentioned, is typically very poor, and there isn't any terrain that would be harder than a low-level single black at a larger mountain. Granby honestly isn't really worth visiting unless you want to go there just for the novelty. Of course, there's no crowds there either, so I suppose that could appeal to some of you. Now, finally getting back to the bigger destination resorts, let's move on to Keystone. Keystone gets the worst snow of all the Summit County resorts, but that's not to say that it's bad. With the new Bergman Bowl expansion this year, I would say that Keystone's biggest strengths are in lift infrastructure and intermediate terrain, as it has plenty of good blue cruisers and almost every lift is detachable. Lift lines aren't as bad at Keystone as at resorts like Breckenridge or Copper, but they can still get bad on peak days. Keystone is very accessible from Denver via the extremely pleasant and never stressful Interstate 70. Keystone is a really good resort for mid-level vacationing families. They have a decent selection of single black terrain, along with a large terrain park area, although that area has been consistently going downhill in recent years. As such, it's also decent for advanced skiers, and, at least for now, it's still a decent mount for park skiers. It is lacking in extremes, and its beginner terrain is generally pretty overrated, so I would look elsewhere if you're looking for that type of terrain. Next up is Loveland. Loveland's weird. It's not affiliated with either Epic or Icon, despite being quite literally on top of I-70. Loveland's big limiter is parking. Once their parking lots fill, they can't accommodate any more skiers. This sets a limit to the amount of skiers that can be on the hill at one time, which, it turns out, isn't that many. Thus, Loveland is one of the only resorts around where you can definitively know ahead of time that there will be minimal lift lines. However, make sure you get there early on peak days, as if you get there too late, the parking lots will be full and you'll have nowhere to go. Loveland is okay at all the different terrain types, and honestly not superb in any of them. They just have a solid selection in each level, except for terrain parks, which are wholly lacking. The lifts are all fixed grip, save for one, so Loveland does get a knock in that category. There's very minimal in the way of facilities, with just a lodge at each base and one on-mountain hut. And of course, you'll have to commute, as there is zero on-site lodging. Nonetheless, I recommend Loveland for everyone, because the empty mountain even on a peak Saturday just can't be beat. Their high elevation yields good snowfall and retention, and their terrain for every ability level is solidly average or above. Next, we have Monarch. Monarch lies in the center of the state, very far away from any large cities. As such, if you're going to Monarch, you've really got to commit to it. Monarch Pass can close quite easily if a large storm comes through, and you'll be driving at least 2 hours from any large city. If you intend to make a trip just to ski Monarch, which very few people do, you can stay about 45 minutes away in Gunnison or Salida. Otherwise, it's going to be a hell of a day trip. Monarch itself has decent snowfall coverage with very minimal snowmaking use. Its terrain is milder than most other Colorado resorts, but it still offers a decent selection for every ability level. Its lift infrastructure is rather lacking, but it rarely sees crowds, with lift lines only topping out at 10 minutes on the busiest days. As such, if you want another chance for that old school, authentic Colorado experience, I would recommend any ability level or intent to take a day out at Monarch. Next is Powderhorn. With I-70 traffic, Powderhorn is often just as close time-wise to Salt Lake City as it is to Denver. As such, it's not really accessible to anyone in Denver. If you're in the Grand Junction area, however, Powderhorn is worth checking out. While it is a small mountain with generally mild terrain, it's not too expensive and it's more snowsure than you would think, given its location right on the fringe of the desert. The infrastructure meets right in the middle, as with one relatively new detachable and one excruciating fixed grip, the lifts balance out, and with solid amenities at the base area but absolutely nothing on the mountain, those balance out as well. As is with many of the other small resorts we've discussed, Powderhorn sees very minimal crowding. If you're in the area already, I would recommend taking a day or even just a half day to ski Powderhorn, but I definitely wouldn't recommend going out of your way just to ski it. Next we've got Purgatory. Many people refer to this resort nestled in the southwestern corner of Colorado as Traversatory. Needless to say, if you want to get from one place to another, you'll most likely be taking a long, flat traverse. With 3 detachables, the lift infrastructure is solid, but when there are long lines at those lifts, which does happen, your alternative options are some 15-minute long fixed grip doubles from the 60s and 70s. The base area has some lodging, but not a ton, so you'll most likely have to stay in Durango and drive to the resort. Needless to say, you're not staying in Denver and visiting Purgy. The resort generally sees decent snow, and its blue cruisers are top-notch. It has a solid selection of tree skiing, but bumps and extremes are rather scarce. As a whole, Purgatory is a solid option, but it's often overshadowed by Telluride and even Wolf Creek. I would recommend it for any mid-level skier who wants a relatively laid-back ski vacation. Sticking down in the southwest, next up is Silverton. My opinion is that if you've never heard of Silverton before, you have absolutely no place being anywhere near it. Silverton is the most extreme skiing in Colorado, period. If you're an expert, I just put it on your bucket list for you. If you're not, then you ought to forget everything I just said. Next up is Snowmass, the final of the 4 Aspen resorts. Snowmass is the biggest of the Aspen quartet and is an intermediate cruiser paradise. It also has decent extreme offerings, but I would say it lacks in single black and green terrain. Off rip, I will go ahead and recommend Snowmass to any and all intermediate level skiers. The lift infrastructure at Snowmass is generally pretty modern, although some of the lifts are starting to get up there in age. Lift lines out of the base can be quite lengthy on peak days, but once crowds spread out, it's generally not too bad. Snowmass is home to some extremely long and tall lifts, with a much larger vertical than the trail map indicates. Thus, if you like counting up vertical, Snowmass is a good option as well. Snowmass has a couple of different base areas that, cumulatively, have a plethora of options for lodging, dining, and even shopping. Snowmass isn't as much of a day trip area, so if you're looking to drive out to the resort several days in a row, Snowmass isn't going to be your place unless you're doing it from Glenwood. If you're an intermediate vacation skier, as already mentioned, I would highly recommend making an effort to get out to Snowmass for a week. For all others, Snowmass can be cool, but there are definitely better options. Next we have Steamboat. Steamboat is just a little bit too far for a day trip from Denver, so you'll want to stay in the town or at the resort. You can get to the resort by flying into the Yampa Valley Regional Airport or driving from Denver or Laramie. Steamboat is infamous for its large dry powder storms, and if you get to experience one of those, you won't be let down. Steamboat offers some very good single black tree skiing. It also has decent groomed blues along with a very good learning progression. There are 2 small sections of extremes as well. The base area is very well developed and the lift fleet just got a massive makeover. There are still plenty of lift lines on the busy days, but that's to be expected. For the true all-mountain vacation skier, Steamboat is very good. If you're a powder chaser, I would also recommend Steamboat. If you're looking for a resort that specializes in something other than tree skiing, however, there are better options out there. Next is Sunlight, which lives in the shadows of Aspen. Sunlight is another of those small ski areas whose biggest draw is a lack of crowds. Indeed, Sunlight fits that bill. While the lift fleet is ancient, it is getting a very slight upgrade this coming summer. The terrain is good enough, although just like all the other small ones, it's rather mild. The thing about Sunlight, however, is that it's so far away that it's not day trippable from Denver. As such, if you're going to ski Sunlight, I'd say it's best you do it as a day trip out of a longer Aspen trip. Of course, if you're in Glenwood just to be in Glenwood, checking out Sunlight for a day is also a good option. Otherwise, it's a rather skippable resort. Heading back down south, let's talk about Telluride. Telluride has a reputation somewhat similar to that of Beaver Creek. However, I find the overall experience to be just as good, if you can afford it. Just like Aspen Mountain, Telluride boasts an unbeatable mountain aesthetic with the resort and town separated but also connected by the resort and gondola system. Telluride has a good selection of terrain for beginners, intermediates, and experts. Especially for the experts. Telluride has some of the craziest inbound steeps in Colorado. The lift fleet is good enough, and anytime there's a choke point, it's fixed within the next couple years. Telluride is very remote, and you'll most likely have to fly into Montrose to get to the resort. However, the town is absolutely beautiful, the skiing is incredible, and the memories won't be beat. For a vacation skier of any level, or any family whose budget allows, I would highly recommend Telluride. There's no single population that I'd recommend skips Telluride, aside from Denverites, I suppose, but that seems rather inherent. Next is Vail. Vail has a very large reputation. Its back bowls seem to get nearly as much attention as the entirety of the rest of the Vail Resorts portfolio. And indeed, if there's been recent snow, those back bowls live up to the hype. The back bowls are almost all single black terrain, which seems to be the right rating, although it's hard to compare that terrain to terrain at other resorts because it's so unique. However, I would say that Vail can be a bit lacking in greens and blues, and although there are some nice cornices and cliffs here and there, expert terrain as well. The Vail lift fleet is ultra modern, but then again, you've all seen those images and videos of the lift line apocalypses that sometimes happen, even with the top tier lift fleet. On-mountain amenities are solid, and the base villages are quite nice, albeit expensive. Vail is right on the cusp of day trip length for Denverites. Staying in Denver and commuting to Vail is not a bad option per se, but it's also not the best option. I would recommend staying at the resort if possible. Parking is also extremely expensive at Vail, and there are very minimal alternative options to paying for the garages. If you want to ski Vail for the name, you'll most likely be disappointed. But if you're legitimately looking for good advanced level skiing and don't mind the long drive, the price, and the lines, then have at it. Next up is Winter Park. Just like Copper Mountain earlier, Winter Park has gone slightly downhill as crowds have skyrocketed. However, Winter Park still offers free parking at a lot of walkable lots, which is a huge bonus. Winter Park is most famous for its bump runs in the Mary Jane territory. And indeed, if you're a sick psycho like me who actually enjoys skiing moguls, Winter Park cannot be beat. There isn't much in the way of lodging at the resort, so you'll probably be day tripping or staying in the town of Winter Park. The nice thing about day tripping to Winter Park is that while you have to fight the traffic at Floyd Hill, you'll be off I-70 well before the tunnel traffic. Winter Park also offers some good blues, greens, and extremes, so overall, I'd say it's a very well-rounded resort. The lift infrastructure is decent, but there are still some significant choke points where old lifts either aren't running or are the only good option. And of course, Winter Park is also known for the Pano terrain, a high alpine intermediate bowl experience that is rather rare at other resorts. If you can stand the lines, Winter Park is a great day trip option for almost anyone. For a vacation skier, however, you may want to look elsewhere, as Winter Park's atmosphere is still a little bit raw, and the resort is a little bit underdeveloped. And finally, we have Wolf Creek. Wolf Creek is known for receiving the most snow in Colorado, and it's absolutely a true statement. If you're a powder chaser, there's no better place in Colorado than Wolf Creek. Similarly to Steamboat, Wolf Creek offers great powder skiing through the trees. However, Wolf Creek lacks in lower level terrain, i.e. greens and blues, and is very remote. Its lift system is very eclectic, with some unnecessary detachables and some painful fixed grip rides. Wolf Creek parking does fill up on the busiest days, so make sure to get there early so you're not parallel parking on one of the most dangerous roads around. Wolf Creek is right in the middle of a pass, so you can stay on either side and get to it. Wolf Creek Pass, however, is tucked away in the southwestern area of Colorado, so it's not reasonable for anyone from Pueblo, Colorado Springs, or Denver to day trip. If you want that powder skiing, or you just like trees, Wolf Creek might be your place. For anyone else, especially those seeking ultra-developed true ski resorts, you ought to look elsewhere. Okay, that about wraps it up for Colorado ski resorts in a nutshell. There's so much more I could say about each resort, so if you have any questions about any of the resorts, leave them down below and I'd be more than happy to share my knowledge. I hope that this video helped at least some of you, and I apologize for the fillers where I didn't have footage. I thank you all so much for watching. All my love, I'm out.